It's working now? So, okay, it's 9 o'clock. We can start the session now. Welcome to the session. Thank you for coming. This is a session about the internals of the query optimizer. My name is Benjamin Nevarez. So this session is about how the query optimizer works, internals. There are a few warnings I need to give you before this session. This is a very advanced level session, what they call level 500 in the US or maybe some other countries. There is also, this is a session about internals. Maybe we can get practical knowledge on 30% of the session that you can apply to get better performance of your queries. But let's say 70% of the session, it is more academic, right? Internals, to understand how the engine works and what the engine is doing. Okay? The other warning is almost everything I covered in this session is undocumented. Right, so we're going to cover a lot of undocumented features, statements, and basically when I say undocumented, it means that you are not supposed to use this in production. You need to be really careful how do you use this. So basically this is something that you can try on your own computer, on your own installation of SQL Server. Okay, so almost everything I cover here is going to be undocumented. I'm going to clarify a few cases when it is not, and you can use in some other cases. A little bit about me. I've been working in a couple of books in the last 2 or 3 years. My latest book is about query tuning and optimization, and we have a few copies to give away on the raffles at the end of the day. There's another book about the query optimizer. You can get that for free on the Red Gate website if you are interested. And what else? I've been working with SQL Server for, I don't even remember, 15 years or more, late 90s, something like that. Okay, so let's take a look at the work that the query optimizer is doing. So first, why we need a query optimizer? When IBM invented a relational database or did the first implementation, they realized they need a query optimizer, right? What is the reason for this? When you write something on SQL, the language, you usually specify the data you want, but you are not telling the engine how to get the data. You are just asking, give me something about customers, or give me something about orders. Okay? So there's several ways to access the data and to get the results. And choosing between one or the other can be a huge performance difference. That's the reason we have a query optimizer. Basically, the query optimizer is going to analyze all the possible choices. Well, not all the possible choices, but many of the possible choices, and it's going to give you a good execution plan, which is going to execute another part of SQL Server, the execution engine. On this session, I'm going to cover the steps of query optimization. This is the very basic diagram about that, and it shows a few steps. You submit a SQL statement to the database engine, and then there's going to be some operations in SQL Server like parsing, binding, and then the real query optimization. When we have the optimization, we always have an execution plan, and then the execution engine is going to run that plan, and it's going to give you the results. we're getting a little bit more complicated into the steps. In the rest of the session, we're going to go into more detail on each of the steps. So this is another view of the optimization process. I mentioned already parsing, binding. I'm going to explain each of these. And then we have another process called simplification. And then something called initial set of join orders, which basically the optimizer based on statistics is going to try to guess some good join orders. So we're going to cover those items in more detail. And then the real optimization, which could be up to 3 different phases, which we call search 0, 1, and 2. And they also have different names on the documentation. Okay, so that's a high-level overview of the optimizer, of the job that the optimizer is doing. So now let's look inside each of those operations. Let's talk about parsing. Parsing is something similar that happens on every other programming language. You specify statements or something, and there has to be a parsing, right? So in this case, SQL Server is going to look at the syntax of the SQL statement to make sure everything looks fine, right? If the syntax is basically correct. The second operation is going to be binding, which is mostly related to name resolution. And they call name resolution because it's looking at the database to see if those objects are really there. If you're trying to access a customer table, it's going to check that there is a customer table. It's going to check that you have the permissions to access that table. It's going to check that the operations are valid for the object. You can execute a store procedure, but you cannot execute a table. You can do a select on a table. So basically something like that, right? It's going to make sure that the operations are valid. If there is a syntax error or a problem on name resolution, you get an error message, and everything stops there. There is no optimization. Something else. SQL Server and the Query Optimizer are dealing inside with a tree representation of the query, something like this. So SQL Server, the Query Optimizer, they are not working with the query the way we write it, right? With the same syntax. So everything is translated into a tree or a tree representation. Each part of the tree is going to be an operation. For example, if we have a query to join 2 or 3 tables, and then we do an aggregation, it's going to be something like this, right? Even when we get the final execution plan, I mean, that's basically a tree, right? That is basically a tree of physical operations. At the beginning, we have a tree, and they call logical operations. Okay. I have a few demos on this session, probably like 5 demos, depending on each one of the topics. The first one is, I'm going to show some undocumented trace flags to show information about these logical trees. It may look a little bit complicated to look at these trees because it is not graphical, it is like text, and it is not using the language that we are familiar on execution plans. It is using a little bit more kind of relational language, okay? But I'm going to show you that. If you want to play with this, you can see this information about the logical trees that the optimizer is using. So let me try to switch to Management Studio. And it is something like this. We're gonna publish the demos. There's gonna be a location for all the sessions, I believe. So, and you can look at the demos for this session. And every